On today's episode, I'll project the Blackhawks' final NHL roster when the regular season begins, and I'll also get into Connor Bedard's season preview.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman, also Blackhawks beat writer for Chicago Hockey Now. Have to let you all know right off the jump that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Go and download the FanDuel app now or check out FanDuel.com to get $300 worth of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, Blackhawks fans, happy Friday. Kicking things off on the show here today. We got a lot to get into as we're now just 4 days away from the start of the regular season against the Florida Panthers. And later on this evening, I'm recording this at around 2:30 p.m. Central Time. The Blackhawks are set to play in their fifth of six preseason games at the United Center, coming against the Minnesota Wild, who they, of course, defeated last weekend 4-1 in their first preseason matchup, led by a hat trick from my guy, Frank the Tank Nazar. But here tonight, for the third consecutive preseason contest, the Blackhawks are icing pretty much all of their projected NHL lineup. And now that we are so close to the start of the regular season, there are a lot of things that are pretty set in stone. However, there are still some battles being fought over, particularly in the bottom six, and who's going to take that final left-handed defenseman spot on the Blackhawks blue line. So I definitely wanted to go through my final Blackhawks roster projection and who they're going to be taking with them come October 7th to face off with the Florida Panthers, and who, unfortunately, I think is going to be left at home. First off, the lineup that the Blackhawks are rolling with here tonight, like I said, a lot of their NHL regulars. This can honestly kind of serve as, depending on when you're listening to this, a little bit of a preview of tonight's preseason matchup with the Minnesota Wild, in addition to also being my projection of the Blackhawks' final NHL roster. Ryan Donato, Connor Bedard, Andre Burakovsky for the third consecutive game are going to be together serving as the top line. Then the second line, pretty straightforward as well, as it's been all throughout training camp and up to this point in the preseason as well. Teuvo Teravainen, Frank Nazar, and Tyler Bertuzzi. I think there's a real good chance that's going to be the top two lines for the Blackhawks when they take on the Florida Panthers on Tuesday. The third line here tonight, though, Landon Slaggert is finally going to be making his preseason debut. He's missed all of the first four preseason games due to an injury. Also was battling with a little bit of an illness. But I talked about on the show recently how head coach Jeff Blashill, despite, great performances from Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene and also Colton Dach through the first four games of preseason action, while Slaggert has been out with an injury, that doesn't mean it's going to cost him his roster spot. And I'm really curious to see how Slaggert is going to look along with Jason Dickinson and Ilya Mikheyev. When training camp first started, that was kind of the quote-unquote third line that Blashill first trotted out there. They finally get their first preseason contest here together against the Wild. And I think it's a pretty noteworthy one for Landon Slaggert, even though Blashill, what he kind of alluded to recently regarding Slaggert's situation when talking with the media. And then down on the fourth line for the Blackhawks here tonight, Colton Dach, Nick Foligno, and Sam Lafferty is going to be jumping into that right wing spot on the fourth line. It was Ryan Greene, Colton Dach, and Nick Foligno as the fourth line the last time the Blackhawks played on Tuesday against the Detroit Red Wings. So going with a little bit of a different combination there to round out this forward group. And that leaves Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene as healthy scratches for the first time here in the preseason. They've actually played in each of the first four preseason games. And as I just mentioned, they both, I think, have looked really good in their push for securing one of these final NHL roster spots. And then, of course, along with Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene, healthy scratched for the third consecutive game is Lukas Reichel, who has had rumors pick up over the last week or so, suggesting that Kyle Davidson is trying to find a new landing spot for the 2020 first-round pick. Honestly, at this point in time, I'd be a little bit surprised considering how the rumors have gone. Not that, what Frank Saravalli says is the end-all, be-all, but it really does seem like the Blackhawks are trying to find Reichel a new home. And also, again, it just considering he's going to be on the outside looking in of this forward group. He's not going to be given a top 6 opportunity this season. There just isn't much of a future here with him for the Blackhawks. And I've talked about how I don't think, selling low on Reichel is the smartest business move, but at the same point in time, as your general manager, you also want to do right by your players. And Lucas Reichel, still a young man in this league. It's clear it's not going to be happening here in Chicago, but that doesn't mean it can't happen for him elsewhere with another NHL club. And while that will be upsetting to see as a Blackhawks fan, if Lucas Reichel, goes in, I don't think he's going to ever be like a Gustav Forsling late type of bloomer, but it would be a little frustrating. But again, it's clear he's just not going to be given that opportunity here in Chicago. So I really am expecting Lucas Reichel to wind up getting dealt before October 7th against the Florida Panthers. But as far as what do I think is going to happen with this Blackhawks forward group before next Tuesday? Who's going to be part of the final cuts? Who are going to take some of these final jobs? Well, I do think, like I said, the top 6, that's set in stone. All 6 of those guys are obviously going to be part of the opening night lineup. I do think while tonight's game is going to be important for his chances, I'm still expecting at this point in time for Landon Slaggert to get that first opportunity along with Jason Dickinson and Ilya Mikheyev. Obviously, Dickinson and Mikheyev, we know they're going to be part of that third line. It's just really who's going to be in that left wing spot along with them on opening night against the Panthers. And then down on the fourth line, Blackhawks fans, another kind of interesting situation here. Nick Foligno and Colton Dach. I think it's pretty clear at this point that Blashill likes what they have to offer with one another as two bigger, more physical forwards down there on the fourth line. We obviously saw Doc's offensive game as he scored the lone goal in the Blackhawks' last preseason game against the Red Wings. But who is going to be the third member of that fourth line, kind of in a similar situation as the third line, along with Dickinson and Mikheyev? Who's going to be that third forward along with Colton Dach and Nick Foligno? And to me, Blackhawks fans, I really do think, even though it kind of seems like an outside chance now based on the roster the Blackhawks are going with tonight, Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene, both as healthy scratches, could definitely foreshadow them being assigned to the Rockford Ice Hogs when the regular season kicks off. However, I just think the Blackhawks could really use a confident, true center iceman like Ryan Greene, who's done really well at the faceoff dot so far here in the preseason and presents a respectable, well-rounded two-way game. And this isn't to say that Oliver Moore doesn't, provide those same qualities other than maybe not being as savvy at the faceoff dot right here, right now. Moore is definitely the faster of the two players. I think his skill set would mesh really well with Jason Dickinson and Ilya Mikheyev, but Landon Slaggert has been on the professional scene these last couple of years, and just how Kyle Davidson has handled his prospects, he wants them to thrive and not survive at the NHL level. I think Oliver Moore could be NHL ready right here, right now, but I also think the Frank Nazar path is probably what they're thinking for Oliver Moore, and that very well could be the same thing with Ryan Greene here, Blackhawks fans. Let me just say that. I could definitely be wrong here about Ryan Greene. However, do the Blackhawks, they could utilize Nick Foligno as a center iceman, and he actually was, I think he was better than Jason Dickinson at the dot last year. He might have been the Blackhawks' best center iceman. However, I still feel like there's an opportunity to allow Nick Foligno to go back and play the wing, also as a guy who's, getting older and not, the fastest on his skates, right? As a center iceman, I just think Ryan Greene could provide a legitimate center iceman on that fourth line who can win faceoffs, and B, he's the faster of the two players between he and Nick Foligno. I think he has the higher offensive upside than Nick Foligno, and while that's not, necessarily what you're looking for, centering your fourth line, I still think Ryan Greene is ready for this opportunity, and he's, between him and Oliver Moore, he's the one who's, I think the Blackhawks view as a legitimate center iceman long-term. So I think Ryan Greene is ready. I do think, it would be tough to have Greene make the NHL roster while Oliver Moore doesn't, because I do think Oliver Moore's been, probably better than Ryan Greene in the preseason, but they're playing two different positions right now. And with Colton Dach cementing himself as part of the NHL roster on the left wing or on one of the two wings, along with Landon Slaggert seemingly going to get the first opportunities if he's healthy from Jeff Blashill, that's just kind of why I'm projecting Oliver Moore to start the season in the AHL while Ryan Greene makes this NHL roster. And again, I could definitely be wrong on that, but that's the way I'm projecting things to shake out right now. And that would leave Sam Lafferty, Lucas Reichel, if he's here, and then also Joey Anderson is still part of the Blackhawks NHL training camp roster, but obviously he's injured at this point in time and isn't going to be playing in any of these 6 preseason games. But if Lucas Reichel winds up getting traded like I expect him to, I do think Sam Lafferty and Joey Anderson would be 2 real savvy extra forwards for the Blackhawks going into the season because, again, they're guys who, you're not going to feel bad about if you're healthy scratching them on a regular basis. They can come into the lineup every now and again, and as veterans, as savvy defensive players, they're going to play the right style of hockey. But again, they just don't have to be in there on a nightly basis, and they fit that spot a whole lot better than Oliver Moore or Ryan Greene, who you want playing on a regular basis and getting those consistent reps. One thing I will say, though, even if Lucas Reichel does wind up getting traded like I expect, I do think there's a chance the Blackhawks only keep 13 forwards on their roster. Sam Lafferty would then be just my lone extra of this forward group. If Lucas Reichel does wind up staying with the Blackhawks, I think he's going to be in that extra spot along with Sam Lafferty, and then that would lead, obviously, Joey Anderson being reassigned back to the Rockford Ice Hogs of the AHL. I think that's probably what's going to happen with Anderson, but I'm really curious to see what the Blackhawks are going to do with him once he winds up getting fully healthy. So that's the way I see the Blackhawks forward group shaking out right here, right now. I think it's really just going to be down to whether the Blackhawks want to start Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene up in the NHL or if they feel like they both could use more time down in the AHL. Obviously, tonight's lineup could definitely be giving a hint that both of those guys are going to be joining out with the Rockford Ice Hogs. However, for the reasons that I just described, I really do think Ryan Greene would be an upgrade in that fourth line center spot. And one thing Jeff Blashill also mentioned when talking with the media not all that long ago, he said, in terms of weighing, what's better for a prospect playing in the NHL right now in a more minimal role as opposed to going down to Rockford and playing, on the top line in all situations. He said it's a case-by-case situation. It does depend on the player. But he also said if a guy needs to work on things offensively in particular, he thinks Rockford would be a good spot for them. Whereas if they need to round out their game a little bit more defensively, he thinks that they could best do that up around these NHL guys. And to me, between Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene, Oliver Moore is definitely the one with the higher offensive upside. I still think, he's going to be best known and he's going to make his biggest impact with his two-way play and how it just uses that speed all over the ice. But between those two, I'm expecting Oliver Moore to be the better offensive player down the road. And I just wonder, again, I could be completely wrong about this, but I just wonder if that's kind of maybe what he was talking about there. And Ryan Greene is a pretty, strong two-way player of his own right. It's a fascinating situation with both of those two guys, Blackhawks fans. And Blashill said they're not going to be making any final decisions until these 2 weekend preseason games wrap up. But yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see who winds up stealing those final jobs. I'm going to give it to Ryan Greene right now in that fourth line spot. Landon Slaggert, I think he's going to be sticking in that left wing third line position. And then that's going to leave Sam Lafferty as the extra forward on the outside looking in. If Lucas Reichel's still a member of the Blackhawks come next Tuesday, I think that's where he's going to be alongside Sam Lafferty as well. Let me know in the comment section below, Blackhawks fans, what you think is going to be happening with both Oliver Moore and Ryan Greene before the start of the regular season on Tuesday. Coming up in just a moment, make sure to stick with me for segment 2 as I'll dive into my Blackhawks projected blue line. But first, I do got to talk to you all about one of today's sponsors, which is FanDuel. The NFL season is now fully underway, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for every kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. And what I personally love about FanDuel is that it's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. With player props, same-game parlays, and more ways than ever to now get in on the action, are you ready to play? All you got to do is download the FanDuel app now or go and visit FanDuel.com today in order to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet and get $300 worth of bonus bets when it wins. Real quick, just a reminder to please go and smash that like button and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already, and enjoy what you're watching here today or on a daily basis. Segment 2, picking up where I left off, getting into the defensemen now for the Blackhawks. Tonight against the Minnesota Wild, similar to the forward group, a majority of the projected NHLers are in the lineup, and it's going to be Matt Grzelcyk along with Sam Rinzel on the top defensive pairing for the second consecutive game, as Alex Vlasic still not healthy enough to return, not expected to be in the lineup tomorrow either against the St. Louis Blues in the preseason finale. However, the Hawks, they are hopeful that Vlasic is going to be healed enough from that cut that he suffered from escape blade. That was, I think, last Sunday against the Minnesota Wild as well. They're hopeful that he's going to be cleared in order to return for the season opener on October 7th, and we know if he is, he's going to be on this top defensive pairing along with Sam Rinzel. Second pairing tonight for the Blackhawks, Wyatt Kaiser, Artem Levshinov. They've been attached at the hip all throughout camp and the preseason thus far. This is their fourth game of preseason action for both of them. They've spent all 4 of those games together as the Blackhawks' second defensive pairing. I think it's pretty clear that's going to be the second pairing for the Blackhawks on October 7th against the Florida Panthers, even though I, don't think it's been the strongest camp or preseason for Artem Levshinov. He definitely has picked up his play in these last couple of games. He and Kaiser as a pairing have performed sturdier as well after kind of getting off to a sloppy start, which I don't think is really all that surprising considering both two very young players. Wyatt Kaiser was obviously dealing with some contract situations early on in training camp. Those things tend to happen, but love to see them both kind of clean up their game defensively for the most part in their last couple of preseason contests together. I was kind of outspoken about a week and a half or so ago that Artem Levshinov, I just didn't think he was ready to thrive up at the NHL level. And again, it's that thrive, not survive mentality that Kyle Davidson and even Jeff Blashill is really starting to preach. I still kind of feel that way. I don't know if Artem Levshinov is ready to thrive in the NHL. I just feel like structurally and positionally and in terms of decision making, he's still got some clear strides to be made in that area. However, given his size, how well he does move the puck, and his offensive abilities, I think given the type of situation, given the type of season that it is for the Blackhawks, I understand Artem Levshinov starting off in the NHL, but I don't want to put this like bad juju on him or out there in the ether. I would not be surprised if it's not the greatest start to his first full season up in the NHL with the Blackhawks for the 2024 number 2 overall pick. And then rounding things out on the third defensive pairing tonight for the Blackhawks, it is not going to be Ethan Del Mastro, who I thought, Tuesday against the Red Wings, on the ice for 2 of the 3 Red Wings goals against. I don't think neither was his fault solely, but I still think, again, he just didn't win over the coaching staff as a whole in this preseason as much as I wanted him to and as much as I kind of expected him to based on what we saw from EDM in the latter half of last season when he was up in the NHL. And Nolan Allan is going to be getting an opportunity tonight along with Connor Murphy. And Allan, his last time out, had a really good showing against the Minnesota Wild. His physicality was on display like every time he was out there on the ice. And he's another guy who, like Del Mastro, has now been on the professional scene for the last 2 years. So I do think there's still an opportunity, or I guess I should say a slight possibility that Matt Grzelcyk gets an NHL contract because Del Mastro and Allan are so young. But again, given the type of season that it's going to be for the Blackhawks, and yes, Nolan Allan is still 22, 23 years old. Same with Ethan Del Mastro. They're still pretty young, but I also think with the type of season it's going to be for the Blackhawks, the prospects are the priorities. I do think Nolan Allan and Ethan Del Mastro, despite what he's shown in training camp thus far, they're both ready to be NHL defensemen. So I would just go that route over giving Matt Grzelcyk a contract to me personally. But I do think, it's a meaningful game tonight for Nolan Allan. If he shows out well and provides a good defensive anchoring along with Connor Murphy on that third pairing, I think Nolan Allan's going to be part of the Blackhawks NHL roster come opening night. I just don't think you could have Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allan, and Ethan Del Mastro all open up the season in the AHL if you wanted to by giving Matt Grzelcyk a contract. But again, even though Grzelcyk would provide some veteran presence on the back end, and the Blackhawks obviously don't have a lot of that, it's basically just Connor Murphy and the kids, I still don't think he's like a real solution. I haven't seen anything good really from Matt Grzelcyk here in the preseason, and I just don't think he's done enough to earn an NHL contract here from the Blackhawks, and I just rather would play Nolan, Allan, or Ethan Del Mastro. I'd rather give them the opportunities over an aging veteran who has no future here in Chicago like Matt Grzelcyk. So Ethan Del Mastro, Louis Crevier are the extra defensemen here for the Blackhawks tonight. Obviously, Alex Vlasic is out with an injury. How I project this Blackhawks blue line to open up the regular season, assuming Alex Vlasic is going to be good to go on Tuesday, he's going to be up on that top pairing along with Sam Renzel, Wyatt Kaiser, Artie Levshinov. They're going to be the second pairing. Then I'm going to guess it's going to be Nolan Allan and Connor Murphy. And it pains me a little bit to say that, as I've always been EDM over Allan personally in my mind. I just think Nolan Allan's, provided the steadier play defensively. And even though Ethan Del Mastro is the bigger of those two bodies, I think Nolan Allan is definitely the more physical of those two. So that's why I'm giving Nolan Allan the edge right here, right now. Then obviously that leaves Louis Crevier as the seventh defenseman. It's time for him to be in that role. He's also not waivers exempt, so the Blackhawks don't want to send him down to Rockford and lose him to another club for nothing in return. So it makes a lot of sense to have Louis Crevier as the seventh defenseman. And that to me means Ethan Del Mastro is going to be going back down to the Rockford IceHogs to open up the season in the AHL. And I'm not expecting Matt Grzelcyk to be given a contract offer by the Blackhawks before the start of the regular season. Honestly, that would kind of rattle me a little bit. And I've said, it's kind of funny how I've turned my opinion on this matter, because when the Blackhawks first gave Grzelcyk the PTO, I said, I think there's a better chance of him making it than people expect. I don't want him to get that PTO or to sign that NHL contract any longer, because again, he's just not a priority for this group long term, and I don't think he's really deserved it over someone like Nolan Allan personally. So EDM, I think, is going back down to Rockford, but how Nolan Allan fares here this evening definitely could be an indicator of what's going to be happening with this Blackhawks blue line. But that's going to take care of my final roster projection for the Blackhawks to enter the 2025-26 regular season. No real need to go through the goaltenders, because it's obviously going to be Spencer Knight and Arvid Soderblom as the number 1 and number 2. But speaking of the 25-26 season, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap up today's show, I still got to break down what I think is in store for Connor Bedard in his junior year in the NHL. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here before I dive into segment 3. And a reminder to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast for your second listen of the day, where the action never ends. There is no off season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage that you love from Locked On. And you can easily find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, it's time to get into my first of a couple season previews that I'll be doing before the regular season begins against the Panthers. And just as a heads up, the next Blackhawks season preview that I will be covering on tomorrow's show, yes, I will be dropping a podcast on Saturday to recap the Blackhawks game tonight against the Wild, then also project and go through a preview of the preseason finale against the St. Louis Blues, which, by the way, sounds likely that there's going to be a ton of AHL guys, in the Blackhawks lineup for that one, considering it's the back end of a weekend back-to-back, and then, they would only have 2 days off before the regular season begins against Florida. You don't really want your NHL guys to already be exhausted going into the start of the regular season, and it's been a very active training camp and preseason for the Blackhawks thus far in the way that Jeff Blashill has worked them. So, fully expecting an AHL-heavy lineup for the Blackhawks. Maybe even there might only be like 2 or 3 guys who play in both games of this weekend back-to-back tomorrow against the Blues. But Frank Nazar, he will be the next season preview that I go over today, though. Of course, got to get into number 98, Connor Bedard, his third NHL campaign. Once again, still without a true, real top liner alongside him, unless the Blackhawks were to make some crazy trade throughout the course of the season. And likely going to be playing on one of the worst teams in hockey yet again, as the Blackhawks they have a lot more speed and they have a lot more youth and a lot more potential puzzle pieces on the scene. But I do think under a new head coach with all of these new pieces coming in, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for them at times, especially on the defensive side of things. But there is no doubt that because of that speed and because of the youth movement that's on the NHL scene now, this Blackhawks group offensively, I think, has a lot more upside than they've had in seasons past. Defensively, considering that Murphy's probably going to be the only veteran of the group, I think they really could struggle back there. But offensively, I really do think this Blackhawks team is just more capable than we're going to see in these last couple of seasons. And tie that together with Bedard's just getting more experience at the NHL level right now, 2 seasons down, another year of experience, in addition to the way his offseason training has gone. I mean, definitely looks faster out there on the ice. That's been super noticeable. I think he looks stronger and bulkier than he's been in his first 2 NHL seasons. And again, just combining that with everything that's going on around the team, with the amount of speed he has alongside him, even though there's not a real true top liner, I'm still expecting Connor Bedard to put together his best season in the NHL with the Blackhawks yet here as a junior. Exactly what that's going to look like, what the numbers are going to be, I'm going to get there in just a second. But before I do, I wanted to first go through Bedard's stats from the last 2 seasons. First, in 2023-2024, played in 68 of the team's 82 games, obviously suffered that fractured jaw on a hit from New Jersey Devils defenseman Brendan Smith. But in those 68 games played, Bedard tallied 22 goals, 39 assists for 61 points on an 82-game pace, would have likely finished somewhere right around 70 points. And out of the 22 goals that he scored in those 68 games, only 4 of them came on the power play. 18 of his 22 goals in his rookie season, despite the Blackhawks being a putrid offensive bunch, came at even strength. And what I think is also noteworthy about that, Blackhawks fans, is he only shot 10.7% as a rookie, which isn't bad by any means. Anything in double digits you'll take. But I do think, and I've mentioned this on the show a lot over these last couple of years, I think Connor Bedard, has the capability to be a 12, 13% shooter consistently in this league with his type of release, with the type of power that he has. The shot also looks harder than it has in his first 2 NHL seasons so far in the preseason. He's been noticeable every single night. Again, just reasons why I believe he is going to take that next step as the Blackhawks offense, I think, is going to kind of take a little bit of a next step as a team as well. But 10.7%, I definitely think there's room for growth for Bedard in that category. Averaged 19 minutes and 47 seconds of time on ice as a rookie. Where he struggled the most was probably at the faceoff dot, which really didn't change as a sophomore. Won just 38.9% of his faceoffs in 23-24. And then the Blackhawks as a team that season averaged just 2.17 goals per game. Boy, was that brutal. That was good for dead last in the NHL, and then their power play wasn't a whole lot better. 16.6% on the season. That was 28th out of 32 teams. Then that takes us to the 24-25 campaign last season for Bedard. 82 games played in every game for the Blackhawks. Love to see him be healthy enough for the entirety of the season and really get the feel of that grind. Not that, he didn't get that playing in 68 games, but playing the full 82, I think, just gives you that experience of what it's like day in and day out to be not only a part of the team's lineup, but a focal point for the Blackhawks as well. In those 82 games, 23 goals for Bedard, which I think was maybe the most disappointing part, considering he potted 22 and 68 the year prior. 44 assists. We did see the growth in the playmaking, but again, not a ton, considering he had 39 and 68 games the year prior. Altogether, totaled 67 points, still led the Blackhawks in that category. What was interesting, though, it was almost kind of done in a polar opposite way from his rookie season, because of the 23 goals that he scored, Connor Bedard had 11 power play tallies last year. That was actually tied for 32nd in the NHL. So only 12 of his 23 goals that he scored in 82 games last season came at even strength. And while I do think that could be kind of looked as a scary underlying statistic, I also think it's a result of the Luke Richardson style of play that the Blackhawks were suffering through for the first couple months of the season there. And then, having to get into a new system under Anders Sorensen. But once that finally got established in those final couple months of last year, along with, again, guys like Nazar, guys like Sam Renzel, just more speed being added to the Blackhawks lineup, giving them a higher offensive upside, then we really saw things start to click for Connor Bedard. So while that could be a little bit concerning that he only scored 12 even strength goals in 82 games last year, I really do think that's ultimately going to be an outlier type of stat in Connor Bedard's career. Then he shot 11.8% last season. Nice rise from his rookie season. I do still think, though, 12, 13% is well in the capability. Averaged 20 minutes and 17 seconds of time on ice. A little bit larger of a role than he had in his rookie campaign, but didn't fare better at the faceoff dot. Unfortunately, it was actually worse as he won just 38.3% of his faceoffs. What was interesting, though, while the Blackhawks weren't all that much better offensively last season, 2.73 goals per game was good for 26th in the NHL. They were a top 10 team on the power play last year, 24.9% on the season. That was 7th best in the NHL. Bedard had 11 power play tallies. Tyler Bertuzzi had 10 power play tallies. I think getting Frank Nazar in that bumper role also late in the season was a sign of some good things to come. And along with Sam Rinzel quarterbacking that Blackhawks top power play unit, I really do think, I don't know if it's going to be a top 10 ranking again for the Blackhawks man advantage, but I do think they're going to be in the top half of the league with their capability on that top unit. Unfortunately, I do think they're going to be giving up a decent amount of shorthanded goals, considering, Sam Rinzel, Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, some young players out there. It's kind of been a symptom of what's happened so far in the preseason, giving up a lot of shorthanded opportunities. But again, adding Sam Rinzel, adding Frank Nazar as top power play staples, I think is going to make this power play a little bit more dangerous for all parties involved. And then that takes us to the 25-26 campaign, Blackhawks fans. Everything that I've been talking about takes me to right here, right now, what numbers I am projecting Connor Bedard to put up in his 3rd NHL season. Well, of course, I'm going on an 82-game pace. The hope is that Bedard is going to be able to play in all 82 for the 2nd consecutive season. He had 23 goals last year while only striking 12 times at even strength in 82 games. Again, along with the speed, the increase, Bedard's offseason training to help alongside him, I expect him to score a lot more even strength goals than he did last year. And maybe he doesn't score as many power play tallies, but I really still think he's going to be the most dangerous player on the ice during the Blackhawks man advantage. So altogether, I'm projecting Connor Bedard to score 30 for the first time in the NHL this season. Shoot, he had 22 in 68 games on the worst offense in all of hockey in 2023-2024. Bedard's hitting 30 for the first time this year, Blackhawks fans. I'm projecting him to finish with 32 goals. I think he's going to continue to take strides in the playmaking department. I think he's going to finish with 49 assists for the Blackhawks this year. And I've mentioned on the show previously, maybe once or twice, it actually might have been during a crossover episode, but I'm expecting Connor Bedard to put together an 80-point campaign for the first time in the NHL. It's happening this year, Blackhawks fans. 32 goals, 49 assists, 81 points for Connor Bedard in 82 games this year. I'm guessing he's going to have right around 10 or 11 power play goals again this season. But with how much harder he's shooting the puck and how much better I think his one-timer is looking as well, I wouldn't be too surprised if he winds up beating that number that he had last season. And then altogether for his shooting percentage, I'm expecting it to be above 12% for the first time in the NHL. In his role in terms of time on ice, I think it's going to be just about as similar as last year, right around 20 minutes, maybe 20 and a half minutes per game. But I do think they're very comfortable playing Frank Nazar in a lot of situations as well. So it might not be super big leap for Bedard or anything. I mean, 20 minutes per game as a forward is usually what you see kind of guys top out at. So don't really think it's going to be getting too much higher, but I do think he's going to be right around 19, 20 minutes per game, playing in all offensive situations as the most dangerous threat on the Blackhawks man advantage. And with the increase in help of Nazar, Sam Rinzel on the power play. I think another year with Ryan Donato as well, establishing that chemistry with one another is going to be good for Bedard as well. I really do believe it's going to be his best season in the NHL so far, Blackhawks fans. The faceoff dot, though, is really somewhere where he needs to make strides as well. It's got to be above 40% here this season. And while if it doesn't happen for Bedard at the dot as a 20-year-old, that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. Doesn't mean he's never going to be a good face-off man. If 3 years in, he's not showing at least progress, right? Again, getting up over 40%, which is come on, that's what you should be hitting if you're an NHL center. If he doesn't get there this season, then I think, in addition to how he looks in transition play as a responsibly defensive-minded center, is he going to make strides in that area once again? If not, along with faceoff struggles again, then we could potentially be talking a little bit more seriously about Connor Bedard being a long-term winger as opposed to a center. But altogether, the Blackhawks really just need him to be their biggest impact player moving forward, regardless of what position he plays, considering the amount of depth that the Blackhawks have in their prospect pool. But I could not be more excited for Connor Bedard here this season. He's looked excellent in training camp and the preseason. The extra gear that he's bringing with him, I really do think is just going to allow him to have so many more opportunities out there, both for himself and for his line mates. And 80 points, I think, is going to be happening this season, Blackhawks fans. Go and drop below in the comment section. Let me know how many points, how many goals you think Connor Bedard is going to be putting up in his third NHL season, whether you agree with me, whether you think my numbers are too high, too low. Give me your full 2 cents down below in the comment section. But that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well. That way, you can get all of the latest episodes as soon as they're uploaded. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can follow me on X at Jack Bushman too. But make sure to check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. Till the next episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Friday nights. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.